All right, so here are my 4 pieces, and I'm just going to trim the little nubs off where I turned the wider part of the top of the facing down. It only shows on the back leg because it's a little bit angled there. Let me cut off that. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I am going to match these up right sides together. Remember, my inseam was more angled than my side seam, so I can tell that by measuring the difference. That's the 1/4 inch on this side, so it's going to go with okay, so this one's going to go with this one, and this one, oops, let me just cut this little interfacing off, is going to go with this one. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew them together just on one end, and then I'm going to pin it in and make sure it's exactly the right length, because I think that's where I got in trouble last time. So let's get the sewing machine up here. All right, so I'm going to pin together and sew using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. The sides, you know what, I think I'm going to do the more angled inseam because the side seam will be easier to match up. So I'm going to go ahead and line up my top edges like that, and I'm going to sew it a 1/2 inch. And I'm going to get them both ready at the same time. And I want to make sure I respect the angle that I cut them out at, so I'm making sure I'm really careful to match up those short ends here. And I'm just going to sew 1/2 inch. Okay, and see, that matches perfectly. Let me do the other one. At a 1/2 inch. Okay. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm literally going to match up the seam with the inseam, which this is my inseam right here. See, there's my crotch, and there's my inseam. So I'm going to line these up, matching the raw edge side with the raw edge side, right with the seam allowance on the inseam, and I'm going to pin it there. And then I'm just going to match it 1 to 1 all the way around until I get to the other side. And obviously you have to make sure that you're putting the front with the front and the back with the back. So make sure you're putting the one, you know, the right legs together here. Just putting in a few pins to hold it. I just want to make sure that it lines up exactly, because I just want it to be nice. All right. All right, so I'm just going to put a pin here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark where the actual seam is. And I can see the seam is right here. So I'm literally going to take my little, well, I'll use one of my friction markers here, my friction pens, and I'm literally going to mark, this is where the seam is at the bottom, and this is where the seam is at the top. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other side. This one's really off. But see, this is why when you use the pattern to create your facing, you're not accounting what you did when you sewed. And if you remember, if you're following along with me, I did French seams here, so I anticipated it would be a little different. So that's why I'm actually measuring. So now I know where I need to sew on this leg, and I'm going to repeat it on the other leg. Okay, so I'm going to pin it to the inseam. And then I'm going to walk it around 1 to 1. Oh, where are all my good pins? Until I get to my side seam. And then I'm going to pin it around the other way. So I'm just very carefully walking it 1 to 1. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to do the same thing I did before. I'm going to mark the where the seam actually is at the bottom and where it is at the top. Okay, see, that's a little bit more than 1/2 inch, and again, that's because I did French seams and took up more of the seam allowance than I would have if I had done traditional seams, just a little bit. All right, and again, I'm going to mark this one, and I'm going to mark this one. All right, that one's actually pretty close. Okay, so now that I've marked, I'm going to take them off the legs. And I have to give myself a seam allowance to follow, so I'm going to cut 1/2 inch away like this. And I'm going to cut 1/2 inch away over here. I'm going to do the other side as well, but I'm going to pin this one onto this leg because this is the one I walked it onto, so I'm just going to keep that together with this leg because I don't want to screw them up, because guess what else can happen? If your sewing isn't perfect, one leg might be a little wider or narrower than the other one, so I tested these this way, so this is how it's going to go. All right, so this is barely 1/2 inch. All right, so this one I'm going to cut to 3/8 because I'm a little short on this side for some reason. So this is going to be 3/8. And I'm going to cut this one down to 3/8. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to sew them up. So I'm going to start with this one because it's a little bit of a different, you know, this is my 3/8 side, so I'm going to sew this at 3/8. Oh, and actually I can just sew right on the line because that lines up. All right, and then I'm going to pin this one to the leg it goes to, and I'm going to do the other one so I don't like switch them. So that one's pinned to that leg. Now I'm going to get this one. Now this one I'm sewing at 1/2 inch. That doesn't matter as long as I know what I'm doing. Like this. All right. All right, yay. All right, so now before I sew this to the legs, I'm just going to press the seam allowances open. All right, so I'm just going to press my seam allowances open like this. And I'm going to do my other leg as well. All right, so you can see that that makes a nice join. You can barely tell that I finished the top edges separately, which is nice. All right, so I'm going to pin this back on over here. And we're going to sew, put my iron away. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my leg and I'm going to take my band and I'm going to match it right sides together, lining up my seams. And the raw edge is face down. And I'm switching to my favorite forked pins now because I want to make sure it stays. And I want to match up this seam. So I'm going to put, a forked pin. And the nice thing about these forked pins is I can hold down both sides of the seam allowance. So see how it holds the seam allowances flat, which is really nice. I love that. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin that together first, lining up the seam with the seam. And then using my forked pin to hold everything in place. I love it. Look at that. Now look at 1 to 1, and I have to say, if I look at the top edge, there's no stress there. So that makes me super happy. So I'm just going to stick one pin in the middle of the front leg and one pin in the middle of the back leg, like this. And then I'll put one over here. And I can feel that this is fitting perfectly. See how nice and flat that lays? Super excited about that. All right, and then I'm going to do the other side. Okay. Then I'm going to do the other leg. And again, at this point, I can't screw it up because I have to put right sides together and I have to put raw edges together, so that makes it easier to put it on right. I just have to make sure I line up the front with the front and the back with the back. So I'm going to go ahead and line up this seam. And I'm going to line up this seam. See, I feel like I'm at the point in this project where I spent so much time taking my time to be accurate that the rest of this should just sew together like a breeze. That's what I'm hoping. All right. Oops. I bent my pin. Okay. All right. So I've got that all pinned. So now we're going to sew these facings on, and I'm going to use a 1/4 inch seam allowance because I had planned for a 1/2 inch total, and I turned the top edge under 1/4, so I'm going to use a 1/4 inch to sew the facing to the bottom of the leg. And that works out great because I didn't want to lose any length on these shorts. I'm going to turn my shorts inside out so I can sew inside the circle and have my pins be on the right side of things. So I'm just going to start here, and I'm literally just going to move my needle over till I'm at about 1/4 inch, like this. And I'm going to just start stitching. All right, so I'm just going to continue around. Okay. Now I bet you can guess what I'm going to do next. I'm going to understitch, which means I'm going to stitch through both seam allowances and the facing, and I'm going to stitch maybe 1/8 of an inch away, and as I stitch I'm going to pull the facing away from the leg. Let me start along one of the seams here. And this is just going to encourage the facing to stay on the inside of the leg. All right, let me just understitch my other leg. Understitching is one of those things that can make a big difference in your sewing. So if you're skipping this step, I encourage you to give it a try. Anything that you're sewing to an edge that has to be folded and pressed to the inside, understitching really helps it stay there. It also makes pressing it into position easier. You might say understitching is pressing's best friend. All right. Alright, I'm just going to overlap my start point. Now let's press these facings into place. Just between you and me, I am playing a little game of hide and seek with my sleeve board, which I would use to press this. So I'm just going to have to go it alone. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to finger press to get it to agree with what I'm doing. You can see I'm just finger pressing it along, and then I'm just going to, I think I have to turn them the other way now. Alright, so basically what I'm doing here is I'm literally just pressing up this facing. And you can see, because I understitched, it wants to fold to the inside. And I can also tell as I'm pressing along that it's fitting really nicely. So I'm going to have a really nice hem finish on these shorts. All right, let me just finish pressing this area in here. Alright, so you can see that that's going to look really, really nice. And I think for this one, I am going to just stitch it, I'm just going to stitch it on the machine. I mean, I top stitched everything else in black, and I think one of the benefits of having a interfaced hem allowance is that I can feel it from the right side, and I'll be able to just follow along the edge really easily. So I'm just going to throw some pins in here. Just to hold it after I pressed it. And then I'm going to press my other one, and then it's just going to be quick work of sewing down these hems, and then my shorts are going to be ready for PatternCon. I'm so excited. All right, and again, I love it that I can feel where the top edge of this facing is really easily. Okay. Oh, this is so exciting. Oh, this is so satisfying to have a nice hem finish. All right, let's sew these puppies up. All right, so I'm going to start and stop on my inseam area, which is right here. And for this, I do not like this foot, so let me just change it. Stitch along the edge of my facing. All right, I'll be happier with this. Okay, so again, we're going to start on the inseam, and I'm just going to put my presser foot so the outside edge is right along the outside edge of the facing, and I can literally even see it through this linen, which is nice. I'm going to make my stitch length like 3, and then I'm going to stitch. And all I'm paying attention to is the fact that it's lining up right there. Okay, another good tip here is if you're working with a multicolored fabric and one of the colors matches your thread, start and stop on the matching color, so then you don't see, you just don't see it, the join at all, because you can't see black on black. All right, and then I'm just gonna snip these threads. Look at how nice that is. Let's look at it from the inside. Look at how nice that is. Everything's matching up perfectly and everything's laying nicely. I'm not going to have any pressing issues here. Let me do the other one. All right, so I'm going to start and stop over here in the black, even though it's not near a seam, because again, you won't see it. I love how easy it is to take these forked pins out. All right, I'm coming to my start point here. Excellent. This is so exciting. Let's take a look. All right, so look how nice that looks. Nice and finished. And let's look at it from the right side. All right, so this is what I was hoping for, to have a hem that has a little body to it. And look at how nice and flat they lay. So there's no struggle there, there's no agita, there's no, clip that, it's not fighting. I suppose, like anything else, I could just give it a little final press. And I'm just gonna cut all my threads here. But I think you can see this makes a really nice hem finish, and it has some body to it, and it's not fighting like my cashmere linen blend pants. Look at how nice that looks. All right, so I am super excited about the finish of these hems. So I know this was a little bit of a longer tutorial, but I wanted to share step by step. So if you're new to garment sewing, this is a perfect tutorial to follow if you're a beginner, because I went through all the steps. If you have any questions or comments, please post those below and I will help you. If you're enjoying my content, consider liking and subscribing to my channel because it helps me grow. And I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to watch. Have a wonderful rest of your day.